Hi, Ruban Selvanayagam from Property Solvers here. Hope you're all doing well. So it's been a while since I last recorded a podcast, so this one's a bit of a one-off for now. But I recently caught up with Simon Misiewicz from Optimise Accountants for a deep dive into property auctions in 2026. We cover why buyers and sellers are turning to auctions, mainly for speed, certainty and avoiding fall-throughs, and how that compares to the open market or private treaty sale. We also run through how the process works today, including traditional versus modern method of auction, pricing, due diligence, financing, and what happens after the hammer falls. And so we hope you get some value out of it. And so just a quick aside, we're also active on YouTube. Please feel free to search Property Solvers and you'll find plenty of our latest videos there. And of course, please feel free to contact me on LinkedIn or email at ruben@propertysolvers.co.uk. I hope you enjoy the episode. How are you doing?
Very good.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. And likewise, we're doing this as a collaboration today.
Yeah. We had you on our podcast, I think about a year ago. We were talking about Section 24, I think, and the ongoing impacts on landlords. So yeah, nice to talk to you. And I think today we're going to be talking about auctions, right? Yeah. Property auctions and what we do. So yeah, fire away any questions you've got. More than happy to answer them.
Well, let's go through, first of all, why would people use I've done auctions myself. I've even bought a credit card on my wife's house on my wife's credit card. So that was an interesting experience. But why is it that people choose to go through an auction to buy a property? And maybe then let's talk about the flip side to that, why people sell through auction.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, thanks again for having me on, Simon. With regards to buying, I mean, really there are some excellent opportunities to be had at auction, simply because a lot of people approach auctions from a selling perspective because they're looking for a quicker sale with more security. And that by and large means that they're willing to negotiate on the price that they ultimately sell for. So, just to give you a bit of background about what we do here at Property Solvers, we started out many years ago as a direct-to-vendor kind of operation where we buy properties directly from sellers that are looking for a quick sale. And then over the years, we kind of realized that a lot of the sellers that we were dealing with didn't really want to accept the kind of below market value offers that we were making. So, at the moment, in the current market, we're offering around 75% to 70% of the market value, which obviously doesn't work for a lot of vendors. So a lot of people that contact us still want security of sale. They still want to, have some certainty with regards to the fact that their sale is going to complete. And unfortunately, you don't really get that with putting your property on the open market or private treaty, as it's otherwise known. So private treaty is obviously the best way to sell your property if you want to optimize the price, like the way I've used to name your company there. But yeah, so it's a great way to kind of maximize the price you get. And if you've got time and you're willing to put up with all the kind of downsides of, selling through an estate agent, it's definitely the best way to go. But a lot of particularly kind of investors, a lot of landlords, a lot of people with kind of quirky, unusual properties, they often go through auction because their properties may struggle to sell on the open market, or if they do sell, it's usually after quite a long windy road to get to that point. So you've got all the kind of hassles that come with an open market sale. So you've got surveys, you've got conveyancing issues, you've got search issues, you've got all these different kind of roadblocks that potentially block a sale. The problem is that when you're selling on the open market, I've sold property myself through the open market, and I know what it's like. You've got buyers that aren't really experienced enough, so any kind of slight issue, they get cold feet and they walk away. And I think the latest statistics are pointing to around 1 in 3 house sales falling through. So auctions are a great alternative for that. If you want to get speed, you want to get certainty, and you don't want to necessarily accept an offer from, a company like ours, Property Solvers, where, the offer is going to be significantly below the market value, but you still want, to get things done within a short time frame. So Property Solvers auctions, we run 2 different types of sale. We've got the traditional auction, which is based on, how auctions have always really existed, which is the 28-day auction. And that effectively means that once the hammer falls, the contracts are effectively exchanged. So the buyer pays a 10% deposit. And if the buyer messes around at that point, it effectively means that they are potentially jeopardizing their 10% that they've put down. So it's very rare for the buyer to pull out. And even if that does happen, the seller can effectively keep that 10% and then just put the property back on the market. So the seller is basically 10% up. So buyers know that, well, most buyers know that when they're going into an auction, but in return, they're getting a deal that's probably, decent in terms of comparing it to what it would sell on the open market. So over the last few years in particular, we've been contacted quite a lot by landlords. So what often happens is that, a landlord would have bought this property, bought their property, 15, 20 years ago, obviously seen some capital appreciation, and then thought to themselves, okay, well, Section 24 is biting. I've got all these costs. My rent is going up, but it's not enough. The tax man's taking a big chunk of my income, my revenue, even though I'm not actually earning that revenue. It's a different conversation. So they just want to sell up. But often these properties need work to kind of get them up to scratch. And you can sell them on the open market, but they're often a little bit more tricky. So, landlords contact us and just say, look, can you just dispose of this property quickly? I'm willing to take a bit of a hit. Typically, for our auction house at the moment, we're pricing at around 85 to 90% of the market value. So, and that depends. Sometimes we can go a little bit higher if there are opportunities to add value to the property. So, if there's land to the side, or if there's potential to kind of convert into an HMO, or, there's a myriad of different reasons as to why a property could be, could be priced quite high and still get a decent amount of bidding interest, So yeah, I'll answer your question in a convoluted way, but in terms of the seller's perspective, it kind of relates to what I've just talked about, really. They get that speed and certainty, and they're also getting a price for the property that's based on kind of real market activity. So you put the property up for auction. If it's priced competitively, you should get a decent volume of buyers or bidders coming to the marketplace and hopefully bidding up the property. So if you price it well enough, you can often get prices above the guide and reasonably close to the market value anyway, because it's that whole kind of FOMO thing that you have with auctions. People always kind of want to bid a little bit higher, and the bidding can get quite competitive. Yeah.
And regards to, you talked about 1 in 3, which if people are in a chain, so trying to sell a property to buy another one, if they've got uncertainty of people buying and making that 1 in 3 chance of it falling through, which means that their next purchase for themselves is at risk, then this is a great solution, I'm sure.
It is, yeah. It really depends as well, though, because as auctioneers, we need to look at what their financial position is as well, because sometimes we get contacted by sellers who are kind of saying to us, okay, well, I need to sell my property by X date, but we need to explain to them that in order to achieve that, you need to be willing to take a bit of a hit, because you're not going to be able to sell that property within the short time frame without taking a bit of a hit on the price. So A, we need to make sure that there's enough equity, and B, we need to kind of bring them to reality to understand that when you're working with a faster time frame, you need to be able to be willing to compromise on price. Yeah. Otherwise, either in that kind of scenario where we do get like chain sales, we would usually say, look, what can we do here to kind of fix the chain, or, kind of remediate the situation as best we can. But it's chain sales can be challenging, because often sellers have got their eye on another property, but they still want the same price for their property, and they're not willing to compromise. It's a difficult one at times.
No, it makes sense. And from a buyer's perspective now, just flipping that on its head a little, if from a buyer's perspective, clearly there is huge amount of savings to be made, potentially. I'm going to say potentially, because sometimes it's not always that good to be there, but in the majority of cases, I would have thought so. What other benefits are there for someone using Property Solver's auction services?
From a buyer's perspective, you mean, Simon?
Yes, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've tried to keep things reasonably fair. A lot of auction houses, charge quite high fees in order to buy properties. We do charge a fee to the buyer, but it's not extortionate by any stretch of the imagination. And what we're trying to do is create a genuinely competitive marketplace for both buyers and sellers. So rather than kind of tilt the fee structure towards the buyer or the seller, we kind of split it down the line so that both the seller and the buyer are kind of paying their fees. From a buyer's perspective, really, the main thing that we try and pride ourselves with at auction is that we want to sell these properties. So we're always looking at, are we providing the buyer a good deal here? Like, are they genuinely getting a decent deal? So I think the main benefit for the buyer is, the amount of equity they're getting from day one when they buy the property, or the opportunity they're getting. So, if they're buying a property that's tenanted, for example, what kind of rental yield are they going to be getting from day one? What kind of equity cushion have they got? How easy is it going to be for them to refinance, or what opportunities are there once they've refinanced, and how much could they potentially pull out from the deal, and that kind of thing. So really, what we're trying to do at Property Solvers Auctions is try and kind of put forward the best possible deals. We would turn down a lot of properties that come our way because we just don't feel that they will sell, because we've been doing property investing ourselves for over 20 years now. We know what makes a good deal, and what doesn't, and it may not fit our own criteria, but it might fit someone else's. So really, the beauty of auctions is that there's a number of, there's a series of good deals that appear, and that's really the main benefit for buyers. I think the opportunity to access deals that might not necessarily be on the open market.
And if someone is looking to get this into the first time, they've not done an auction. I've been in an auction house before where it's my first time, and you don't bid when you should, or you bid and you shouldn't have done. What can Property Solvers do to help someone along using your services, especially if they're thinking, well, actually, I want to build a portfolio. Property Solvers are the right fit for me.
Yeah.
What would you say, and how would you help them?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because I feel auctions have changed quite a lot over the last kind of 4 or 5 years since COVID, because the majority of auctioneers, including ourselves, have moved online. Actually, we've always been online, but it's meant that tension that you originally had in the auction room has kind of gone. So with us, with regards to the auctions we put up, we have a 3-week marketing period. And during that period, we would upload the legal pack. Unless the seller insists of there not being a legal pack, we always kind of make it pretty compulsory that they do have a legal pack, because we feel that will maximize the price that the seller will get, but it'll also enable the buyer to do their own due diligence into the property. So I can't remember what the statistic was, but there's actually a surprisingly low number of people that buy auction properties that don't actually check the legal pack. And for us, it's fundamental. Like if you're looking at buying a property, especially if you go down south, you're looking at a few $100,000 minimum as a purchase price. There's still people that just buy these properties without even looking through the legal pack, which is why we always try and keep things as transparent as possible and say, look, really spend the time to kind of go through it. There are tools out there nowadays, like AI tools, where you can just feed the legal pack into an AI tool and just say, look, raise any red flags that might appear. Some of them might be a little bit OTT. There might be some things that you just think, okay, well, I can get around that. But if there's something a bit more serious, like a restrictive covenant or a negative easement or something like that, it does warrant some further investigation, because the last thing you want to do is buy a property at auction. And by and large, the majority of people that do buy at auction are buying with cash or bridging finance. So you don't really want to be stuck in, a heavy bridging loan if you can't refinance the property, or you can't sell it after you've done the works, because there's this underlying legal issue. So it's worth just checking all of these things up front, making sure that everything is in place. Things like cautions and things like restrictions on title. There's a whole range of things. I've done a post on LinkedIn. I can send you it and so you can add in the show notes, which kind of goes through the different kind of red flags that can appear. So really just kind of going through your due diligence. So in addition to viewing the property, there isn't a lot of time to kind of get your ducks in a row, but we will answer as many questions as we can with regards to the property that we know about. So if, for example, there is a question about the condition of the property, we would be able to say, look, okay, yeah, we can see that it needs work, but any kind of structural issues and things like that need to be investigated by the buyer. It's the whole kind of caveat emptor side of things, really. We have a responsibility of as an auctioneer to kind of clarify what we know in terms of, say the property is like non-standard construction or something like that, we do have obligations to kind of clarify that. But the real detail needs to be looked at by the buyer. And so, we'll have the legal pack ready within a few days of launching the property. We very rarely would have a property without a legal pack. But really, it comes down to kind of looking at that, making sure the condition of the property is what you expect. With auction properties, there is a little bit of risk that buyers take, but often that's being priced in already with the value and the guide price that we've put it at, and the reserve price we've agreed at with the seller. So, risk needs to be taken into account, but I think you can figure out what's going on by just looking at the legal pack and taking the time to kind of really analyze the property, just like you would any other property investment, really. So for new first time auction buyers, I would say, spend some time to kind of really understand how the auction market works and the bidding process. So, we deal with a lot of buyers that are, experienced landlords, experienced investors, traders, and they really know how to kind of just bid and do things aggressively. But one thing with auction bidding at the moment is that you can do proxy bids. So say, for example, you see a property and you say, okay, well, let's say it's worth, in your eyes, it's worth 100,000. You're not willing to pay anything more than that. But the starting price is around 90,000. You can put into the system, okay, I'm not willing to bid more than 100,000 for this. And at that point, you can just withdraw yourself from the auction. So you're not constantly kind of bidding or clicking on the bid button. You say, look, this is what this property is worth for me. I'm willing to pay this amount. If someone wants to go higher, fine, let them. But that's my limit. So you can just set that price. It's like eBay, it's a similar kind of thing where you can just kind of say, look, that's what I'm willing to pay for it. And anything more is not willing, I'm not willing to go for it. And if the bidding doesn't achieve that level, then you'll end up getting it for a cheaper price, if there's no other bidders. So sometimes that can work in your favor as well. So there's mechanisms in there that are aimed at obviously protecting the reserve price, but also helping buyers kind of realize that you don't have to go crazy at auction. You can kind of pace yourself and like figure it out according to your own criteria. And one thing that is working in buyers' favor at the moment is it's still a buyer's market at the moment out there. Auction buyers are being a lot more discerning with regards to what they're taking on, and I think this environment is going to remain for quite some time now. So when we're speaking to sellers, we're saying, look, we really need to price this a little bit more conservatively in order to be able to sell it. And it goes back to what I was saying before. A lot of sellers have kind of raised expectations about what their property is worth. So we have to educate them and say, look, okay, in 2021, we might have been able to get you this kind of price because back then when we first started out our auction house, we were able to sell properties like considerably above the guide price because, we had a period of low interest rates. The market was going crazy, but things have changed quite a lot since then, So yeah, we adapt to the market, and our job as auctioneers is just to educate both sides, really, the seller and the buyer, and say, look, we would love to be able to get you this price, but if the market is not doing the talking and the market is not saying that's where things are priced, then unfortunately we have to kind of work to the market. And that may mean that the property doesn't sell at auction, and we're more than happy to relist as many times as required. But sometimes some adjustments are needed to kind of really kind of get the ball rolling,
Yeah, which is really important. And lastly, for someone that's looking to work with property solvers as the auction house, when it comes to finance, again, just going back to the people that are starting out using auctions and getting that support service from you guys, if someone's looking to use an auction to buy a property, there is issues around mortgages, aren't there, in terms of being able to buy an auction property, buy it in cash, and then refinance. Can you just talk us through that just a little?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the condition of the property. If you're looking to buy a mortgage with a mortgage, it's going to be very difficult. I mean, the other type of auction we mentioned is the conditional 56-day, also known as the modern method auction. So that's a different type of auction where you have an extended period to exchange and complete. So what happens is the hammer falls, you win the bid, you win the auction actually, and at that point, you haven't exchanged contracts like you have with the unconditional auctions. but you have another 28 days to exchange contracts, then a further 28 days to complete. In that kind of scenario, there is time to organize mortgage finance. So, you can get things done within that time period. It can be challenging in today's market because mortgage lenders, as you know, Simon, are a lot stricter and a lot more stringent. But, you're still going to have to go get a survey done and make sure that you're ticking all the boxes that the mortgage company requires. And there are some lenders that are better than others. But by and large, as I mentioned before, majority of people are buying with bridging finance or cash. So bridging finance is great if you found the right kind of deal and you've done your due diligence and you know that you've got an exit strategy at the end, because you really need one with bridging finance, because the fees, the arrangement fees, the exit fees, the ongoing interest fees are very high. So all that equity that you've bought, that you've enabled when winning the auction could eventually effectively disappear with a bridging loan in place, and it's especially with things like, the stamp duty surcharge and everything else, you'd be surprised at how much of your margin goes. So yeah, bridging loans are great, but just make sure that you know what you're getting yourself into. And, there's a few out there, few bridging companies out there that are a bit more kind of, they're working with buyers a little bit more, I would say. And, the fees are a little bit more competitive because they're trying to get a bit more of a market share. So there are a few out there that are getting better actually, and a lot less scary than how they used to be, but that doesn't mean that you don't need to be cautious, because as I say, bridging loan terms can be quite punitive if handled in the wrong way. Yeah.
That was really good. And thank you ever so much for explaining that. That's so nicely put. From a buyer and a seller's perspective, I think realism is a key thing. Making sure that you understand what the legal pack is, do your own due diligence, and making sure if you are a buyer that you understand financing, which is crucial. Yeah. So thank you very much for explaining that so nicely.
No worries.
In terms of people getting to start, what's the website?
It's auctions.propertysolvers.co.uk, or if you just Google or ChatGPT or AI tool of your choice, Property Solvers Auctions, you'll find us there. You can email me at ruben@propertysolvers.co.uk, or email the team at auctions@propertysolvers.co.uk. Whether you're a buyer or seller, more than happy to provide some free guidance. If you're selling, by the way, we can produce a free auction valuation report, which has a series of kind of data points that are not available in the public domain, and really help you get the right kind of price for your property so that you can just get it live and get it sold. And also, I did mention before that, with auctions, if you're really looking for a quick sell, if your property is priced competitively, we get a number of investors that contact us and just are willing to make pre-auction offers, so we can get the sale kind of moving really quickly for you, and we also have an investor list as well. So I was going to ask you about the black book, because everyone's got a black book, so you have one yourself. Yeah, we do. Yeah, we've been building up slowly and surely over the last few years. So what we do is we have an investor profiling form. So, you can just answer questions. I think you filled it yourself, Simon. You can answer questions with regards to your specific criteria, how much capital you've got to invest, how many deals you want to do. And then anything that comes through, like say, for example, you're looking for deals in Nottingham, anything that comes through our auction, and also through, sellers that we speak to on Property Solvers who are looking for something a bit more discreet but don't want to go through the auction process, we can send that over to you to have a look at. And maybe there's a private transaction that can be done there. So buyers, sellers, Property Solvers, key for your auction. So go and contact Ruben as soon as you can. Ruben, thank you ever so much for today. Thanks so much, Simon. Really appreciate the time. You're very welcome.